I'm Lawrence Corley, and I'm less interested in the decisive moment than in the aftermath of decisive moments in our lives. My personal decisive moment happened when I was 3 years old, when my mother walked out on our lives forever. Now, I don't know whether anything was said about her sudden disappearance, and I don't even know now whether I asked. Until I was 9 years old, there was just my father and I, but more of that later. Photography entered my life when I was about 6 years old. We were living on the Isle of Wight, where he'd become a teacher to fit in with my school hours. I found him one day taping large sheets of black PVC material around the windows of the unused bedroom next to my own. A dark room, he said. Then came the magic of standing in a red-lit chamber, slightly overwhelmed by the heady mix of chemical odours, watching memories emerge from blank pieces of paper. At about the same time, I discovered just how large the world was. It happened as I sat with my grandfather on a chair as we peered together at his globe. That visceral sense of wonder returned a few weeks later when my father showed me a picture of that same moment, me with my grandfather. Now, I hadn't realised at the time that my father had taken a photograph, and a picture, I realised, could embalm time and reconjure the feelings of a moment. An early testament to Marvin Hefferman's observation in Photography Changes Everything, that we continually refer back to photographs which function as prompts and talismans, magic, psychology, and the fixing of place and time. Now, I studied history and historical anthropology at university, but I always struggled with big history told in huge sweeps, big events and mass social changes. Far more revelatory to me were the micro-histories like Carlo Ginzburg's The Cheese and the Worms, the tale of a 16th century miller called Minocchio who was tried for heresy for questioning the world around him. I think that's probably why I became a journalist, only returning to photography when I joined the BBC and felt that growing urge to match my own imagery to the stories I told. Most of my work has been portraiture in some form or other. In that time, I've tried to show what 12 dead children killed in a bus crash looks like through their absence in a class with their teacher. The worlds of both adults and child carers, the issues surrounding treasure hunting, and the people trying to piece together the identities of unknown human remains. The imaging was functional in terms of breaking up text and bearing some kind of relationship to the stories being told. But I'm not sure they did much more than that. There's a distance and there's a nervousness in my early photography. It's an adjunct to the text. More recently, I've been trying to get closer and to capture the emotion I feel as a storyteller and as a witness to what I'm reporting on in my imagery. Fascinated by what Alex Soth calls the relationship between the surface and the speculation of what's going on inside, I'm drawn to the work of photographers such as Margaret Mitchell and Harris Mizari, in their intricate balancing of person, place and the psychological drama beneath. Increasingly, I'm actively seeking the participation of subjects in terms of ideas, and I've taken inspiration from Beaker to Porter's As It May Be in terms of negotiated work. The output of my work on refugees in Tilbury, for example, came directly from the suggestion of the subjects who wanted to be present but not to have their faces seen. When I looked at the issue of office block housing conversions in Harlow, I worked closely with a single mother called Mel to make a picture that showed what she wanted in the image. The sofa on which she sleeps, the lack of storage in her studio apartment and the cramped entrance to her bathroom. A good deal of my recent work is focused on the Essex seaside village of Jaywick. It's officially the most deprived ward in England. In an attempt to counter the poverty-porn narratives in the media, which focuses on benefit claimants, substance abuse and chalet-style housing, I've got to know the people there and strive to see the world as they see it themselves. Now, in approaching a seaside community, I've been very mindful of the work of Martin Parr in similar communities such as New Brighton. But while Parr states I think part of my job is to try and highlight the more surreal aspects of beach life, I've been more persuaded by Stuart Franklin to photograph in a manner that is empowering and respectful, and I felt very at home in Jaywick. Now, it's only just occurred to me why that might be the case. You see, I grew up in a seaside community on the Isle of Wight in Sandown, which is one of the poorest communities on the island. My bedroom overlooked a caravan park, and the kids in our street would often play with the visiting children. Now, my starting point was collecting portraits of the people I met there. I was keen to focus on the faces as divorced from the place, so often maligned in the public's imagination. But as I started to look over my output, I realised I was collecting faces, rather like one might collect stamps or my son collects Pokemon cards. Fine faces. Interesting faces, yes, but dislocated faces too. And I couldn't see where this was leading. Was I creating a Charcot-style anthropological typology of the people of Jaywick? It made me feel a bit uneasy. And I came to realise that the people of Jaywick are far from ashamed of their place, even if their journeys there may have been bleak and varied. I took an about face and started photographing the people in places that mattered to them in some way. Their place of work, down on the beach or in the watchtower that they may well have built in order to keep a view over their neighbours. But when I looked over that project as it stood, I realised I had a decent sense of breadth and surface. But where was the depth? Where was the lived reality of these wonderful people giving me their time? I've been mindful not to fall into the idealisation trap outlined by Roland Barthes in his mythologies of reducing the plurality of lives in Jaywick to a single common mould. One subject has moved me particularly: Carol. Now, she moved to Jaywick 3 years ago following the suicide of her son Scott and a marital breakup. She moved to Jaywick because it was the only place she could afford a home. First, I made an image outside her favourite eatery, a place called Aussie's. Then she told me some of the ashes from her son Scott had been turned into a tattoo upon her arm. She allowed me to photograph that. Now, when I posted the image of Carol and her tattoo to the forum, my fellow students were really kind. I was grappling with this issue of how much needed to be explained in the text and how much of her story was actually told by the photograph. Now, the conclusion I came to was that the photograph simply didn't tell the story and that my photograph hadn't worked. What was needed was not more words, but more and more purposeful photography. Carol kindly let me reshoot. Alex Soth's Niagara includes love letters as part of his visual storytelling. They add, in my view, an extra dimension, a relationship to the past, and provide a presence to a person not actually present in the images. Now, this was a key influence in my desire to include images of documents that related to Scott. A birthday card made on decorated slate from him to his mother, and the chit which was stapled to the box of his ashes. It felt imperative in terms of the birthday card that the images hear from as well as speak of Scott. Do these images make some headway into the depth of visual storytelling that I'm seeking? Well, I hope so. I think so. At least it's a start. And in making these images, I feel I'm touching upon a loss, not just Carol's and a mother's loss of a child, but my own, a loss of a mother. It has cemented for me where I need to take my final major project, and that's in 3 directions. One, into my own history and memory of being raised by a lone father. Second, out into the world of contemporary lone fatherhood. And third, into my own place in the world, actually as a father to my own children. So where to start? Well, others have looked at lone parenting, and portrait photographer Harry Borden has looked specifically at lone fatherhood in his project Single Parent Dads. His image is a finely crafted series of portraits of fathers and their children. They are orderly in format, the fathers all appear to be doing a sterling job to an outside world, and the homes are clean and well kept. But I don't feel they tell me much about the experience of actually being a lone father, or of the child of a lone father. My starting point on this project has been to open up a dialogue with my own father about our early years together. In a letter he's written to me as part of this project, he tells me of the intense financial constraints, with an income that simply didn't even stretch to clothing, of his being unable to make any kind of commitment to an adult relationship with women, and of how hanging out the washing line drew lots of female critics. There were moments as well of intense loneliness and self-doubt for my father as to whether he was actually enough. Might this psychologically chaotic world be best approached head-on, as Trent Parker's done in Minutes to Midnight, or more poetically in an staged manner by the likes of Laura Panak in her recent series on relationship dislocation in the face of Brexit? Now, I'm keen to explore all avenues, and somewhere in that find my own voice and vision. Accompanying that letter from my father was a manuscript, and it was his first attempt at a novel, written during those lonely hours after my bedtime. We didn't go to television until I was 9 years old. He never sent it off with a view to publication, and I've not read it until now. And I'm keen at this stage that my project be some form of visual response to his own writing and memories. Of course, my proposed project comes with potential pitfalls and hurdles. Why lone fatherhood? Women, after all, have found themselves abandoned by men so often and for so long that the phrase single mother or single mum is a part of everyday and political parlance. Transgression of familial responsibilities by men passes largely without comment. Is such a transgression by a woman any worse? Of course, the answer's no. But I think a feminist critique can be put the other way, that society was, and perhaps still is, far less accepting of a man taking lone charge of his children. Then there's the risk of sentimentalism. Dawood Bayin on photographing people and communities writes in a section on transcending difference that even when you're part of a community you're photographing, you may not be able to see it clearly and end up making something overly sentimental. My motivation is to explore the economic, psychological realities and social dimensions of contemporary lone fatherhood and relate it comparatively within the historical context of my own experience and my father's writing. More cautiously, I also hope to chart the experience of the children being parented, their friendships, their sense of difference. I hope the work that emanates, whether in a photo book or as an exhibition, will both be worthy of breaking the visual silence and perhaps shed light for the subject, audience, and of course myself on the realities of lone fatherhood.